Hey guys, and welcome back to another Q&A. So, it's been a while since I've done a Q&A, and while I do have a document that's full of questions, a lot of the questions are perhaps of the smaller variety in terms of the scope of the topics that they are about. So, if you do have any questions, of course leave them down in the description, especially if you have any questions on a really far-reaching topic, the kind of thing that could really make a really awesome, beefy video. I'm really interested in hearing some of those. But anyway, let's get on with today's video. Now, questions here are perhaps not the most giant topics, but they're certainly really quite important. Now, first of all, we have a question from Aurora Gaming, who asks, how do you think we are going to do the Dark Portal? Are they going to separate Outlands and Draenor? Do you think they're going to put a portal in our capital cities, the Cavern of Time, or even the base of the Dark Portal itself? Or hell, perhaps even a second Dark Portal? Well, that's actually a really good question, and it's something that I've seen a lot of players ask. So currently the way that things work in the Warlords of Draenor beta is that the mage portals inside Stormwind and Orgrimmar will take you directly to Hellfire Peninsula. Now, in the beta, the Blasted Lands portal will also take you, i.e. the Dark Portal itself, will also take you to Hellfire Peninsula. However, they have not actually activated the Warlords of Draenor version of the Blasted Lands. Now, if you aren't aware, in Warlords, at least at level 100, in the or level 90 even at the Blasted Lands, the whole place has been invaded and the Dark Portal has turned red. When that was previously active in the game, going through that portal would not do anything to us. We just sort of, go through it and then hit the wall on the other side. So I'm not 100% sure how we're actually going to get to Draenor. Now, what actually happens in the beta is that you give Khadgar the word, and Khadgar ports you into Tanaan Jungle. However, my hypothesis anyway, is that what happens is you go through an introductory questline inside the Blasted Lands. Now that is absolutely true, but the thing is that the version of that questline that was in the beta for a little bit of time didn't actually end right. It basically showed you the wrong cinematic and then it ended. So I'd imagine that what would happen in that is that you would end up just activating the Dark Portal, going through it, and that of course being the Warlords of Draenor Dark Portal. So what they will likely do is have it so that Outland is just somewhere that you go to via the Mage Tower in Stormwind, or if you are below level 89, then Outland is just via the regular Dark Portal, but if you're level 90, then the Dark Portal will turn red and be at the Warlords version. And then again, if you were under level 90, then the Mage Portal would just take you to the Blasted Lands as it does now, but if you were 90 or over, then the Mage Portal in Stormwind would just take you directly to Hellfire Peninsula. I suppose that's how they would do it. There has been some talk about just moving it over to the Caverns of Time, and while I do see that being lore-wise a kind of cool way of doing it, in that I guess technically Outland is in the past, I honestly think that the Mage Tower version, or way of doing that, is a little bit better. Okay, maybe it's not as immersive or something like that, but it's actually extremely playable, and it means that Outland is still going to be accessible, instead of you having to port to Dalaran, and then taking the Dalaran portal to the Caverns of Time, then flying into the Caverns of Time, which can be annoying in itself in terms of navigation, and then having to find the right portal to take you to Outland. I just think it's easier to have it in the Stormwind Mage Tower, if I'm going to be honest about it. Okay, so next we have a question from Reckless Sarthis, who said, do you believe they will add, or at least do more, with Old Ironforge and King Magni come Warlords of Draenor? So I don't think anything is going to happen in that regard. Old Ironforge, from what I've seen of it anyway, looks awesome, but I just can't see any way in which they would have to use it. I think if there was ever going to be a time to have lots of Old Ironforge stuff going on, it would have been Cataclysm, and they clearly didn't do too much with it then. And as for the whole story with King Magni, well, they just froze him, or turned him into diamond or whatever. They didn't do anything with that. I don't know, I don't think it was a very good story. I mean, okay, I suppose they just wanted to find a way of getting the Council of the Three Hammers in, because that could lead to some interesting political intrigue. However, they just did not do King Magni justice. A really badass, king of the dwarves shouldn't just be frozen not frozen, shouldn't just be turned into diamond and sort of poof, you're gone, inside a novel, not even inside the core World of Warcraft game. I thought that was really unfortunate, and perhaps at some point we will restore King Magni. I'd imagine if they were going to do some dwarf intrigue, that perhaps some sort of evil force would infiltrate the Council of the Three Hammers and perhaps compromise a few of its members. And then King Magni would somehow be freed from his current diamond state and then you and Magni would go and, sort of clean out the Council of the Three Hammers and save the dwarves. That could be a cool little story, but I just can't see it fitting in, honestly. Warlords of Draenor is the story of Draenor. It is not the story of Azeroth. That's something the Blizzard have tried to drive home, I think. So it's definitely rather unlikely that we're going to see any of this happening in Warlords of Draenor. And honestly, all signs are pointing to the next expansion being the Burning Legion, so again, I don't think we'll have much of it happening there. However, if there was going to be another Old God expansion, so maybe the Ashara one that deals with N'Zoth, then absolutely, I think we would get some sort of Magni story, because, Ironforge is in a mountain, it's in the earth, old gods seem to do things from the earth, and I guess that was technically because Deathwing was the Earth Warder, but whatever. I like the idea of tentacles in caves, apparently, so maybe they could just find a way to get a Magni story going inside a Old God expansion. Hell, maybe N'Zoth could just take over Moira, and then we would, go on some quest with Magni or something. I don't know. Look, it could be interesting, but whatever. Hypotheticals. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. This one is from George Tallyho, who said, "What do you think about the decreased levels of crowd control in Warlords of Draenor? How do you think this will affect PvP and PvE?" Alright, very good question. I think that it's going to actually have lots of good effects. So currently, things are not 100% balanced in PvP, and it's a little bit weird, but it's not really going to affect PvE. That's one thing for sure. I've seen a lot of hardcore raiders actually give me feedback saying, and by the way, bearing in mind, these are hardcore raiders that are not in the beta, have been giving me feedback saying that the reduction in CC abilities and interrupts is going to potentially hurt the depth of the high-end raid content that they will be doing. I can say that that isn't the case. You will have a interrupt or something like that on your class, and the thing is that you don't really need to interrupt every 10 seconds in a raid, and honestly, if a raid mechanic involves interrupting every 10 seconds, then it's the kind of thing that should be designed for, a team, so maybe 3 or 4 people with an interrupt rotation. That's how that should be working in raiding, so there's basically no effect on the raid scene. However, for PvP, it's going to have a number of sort of good, implications. There will be less CC, and okay, it won't be as strong, but your CC usage is going to be more important. Bear in mind that in PvP and Warlords, healing is going to be different. It's not going to be as ultra spiky as it was, or, in Mists of Pandaria. That means that if you're able to, CC at good times and just sort of close down, strong combos by enemies or stuff like that, you'll be able to slowly gain an advantage over time. As opposed to the sort of current system in Mists of Pandaria, where you just CC nuke, and if your nuke fails, then there's a good chance you could die. It's very just over CC-ish at the minute, especially if you're going against the Warlock who can, say, fear you, then mesmerize you, and just sort of, keep on bollocksing around with you for ages. Stuff like that isn't conducive to good gameplay, and it does lead to a few kind of balance problems, so I think things are just going to balance in a different way. Healers are not going to be healing as much of your maximum health per second as they previously were, and damage dealers are not going to be dealing as much of your health per second as they previously were. Then CCs, again, are not going to be as prevalent, so what's going to happen is you'll probably want to CC the healer when you're about to get a kill or something like that, and they're just going to make it a little bit more of a slow pace, because I just think that right now PvP in Warcraft has been a little bit mental. However, because there's less CC and because some of the gameplay will be slower, it may not have, I suppose, as much depth in terms of the raw amount of actions per minute that playing optimally will require. So this is definitely going to mean, at least from what I can see, that PvP will be a little bit more accessible. Now, of course, that does fit in pretty well with the idea of the new skirmishes that they're bringing in, and with Ashran and all that stuff. And look, overall, I think that in the high end, because PvP is going to have a relatively balanced toolkit between all the classes, you're still going to have, skill being a massive factor, but it's going to be a bit easier to get into in the low end, I suppose. I need to do more testing in the Warlords Alpha, or Beta even, and look, at some point I will bring you my PvP impressions, but I think that overall, it's, the CC removal is probably going to be good for how PvP plays. Because, look, at the end of the day, does being CC'd, chain-wise for, 20 seconds really feel like a lot of fun? No, it doesn't. Not at all. Oh, one more thing as well, and they've also merged a whole bunch of diminishing returns categories. That means that essentially just repeat CCs of the same type are going to be less effective. I think that's actually a very important thing for them to do, and look, overall, I like it in principle. I just need to do a little bit more gameplay to, just work out if it's actually going to be a really sort of positive thing for the game. Okay, so finally there's a question here from Fenrisselfer, I think. I'm probably butchering that, but anyway, his question is pretty valid. He said, what would you like to see added to Warlords of Draenor and Frostfire Ridge? Now, of course, by extrapolation, Warlords of Draenor does mean every zone, not only Frostfire Ridge. So what would I like to be added? Well, look, first of all, this is just going to be the quick little version. I may do a full video on this if I can just scope out a whole bunch of valid suggestions. But the one thing that popped into my mind when I read this question is that I would like some less deterministic, more randomized content. And I know that a lot of you guys are probably thinking, geez, you say deterministic a lot. I do. I don't like it when games are ultra-deterministic, which is my one bugbear with World of Warcraft. So I think what would be really cool is if you could have just a whole bunch of randomized stuff inside zones. So maybe every once in a while you would see an Iron Horde little like war party run across the zone, or maybe some other time you could see an ogre war party and the actual rewards for killing that war party, and maybe the NPCs inside that war party, maybe even a mini-boss, could be randomized. I think that would be great. Just little camps of NPCs, little patrols of NPCs and things like that are randomized, just would sort of make the world feel a little bit more alive and vibrant and all that sort of stuff. And they could, of course, do randomization with a few other things, so just randomized items that you could find around the place, randomized chests. I just like the idea of random things, because, say in the Timeless Isle, the fact that those treasures are not randomized is a little bit unfortunate, because all you do is you look at a guide, put a bunch of waypoints in-game, and then run between all of them. I don't think that's particularly interesting, and Blizzard can absolutely do a better job of that. So yeah, the quick answer is I would like some random elements. The only thing I've really proposed in this video is just random parties of enemies traveling across the map, but it could be anything. It could be maybe a randomly spawning mini-boss, and that is, on a maybe 4-hour spawn timer, and that mini-boss could perhaps be very powerful with randomized abilities, nearly even Diablo 3 style. I think it's actually pretty fun how they do their bosses. Just things like that, I think it could add that little bit more sort of spice and that sort of interesting random element that could make every playthrough of a zone that little bit more different. So there's my basic idea for that, and really that's the end of the Q&A. So if you have any questions of your own, please leave them down in the description. The questions that are likely to be answered are the ones that tackle more interesting topics, so if you could see your question being the kind of title of a video, one of those really awesome, badass, worthy questions, then absolutely leave it down in the comments, and there'll be a very high chance of me checking it out in a future episode of the Q&A. So that's it for me. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, all that great jazz, and I will see you next time.